The storm raged outside, turning the Montana wilderness into a frozen wasteland. Jack Turner had long embraced the silence of his secluded cabin, until that night. A desperate howl pierced through the wind, followed by frantic scratching at his door. When he opened it, a German shepherd, half buried in snow, collapsed at his feet. Its eyes, haunted yet pleading, held a story far beyond the bitter cold. Jack had no idea that saving this dog would unravel a mystery buried in ice, forcing him to confront the past he tried to forget. But what did this dog know? And why did someone want it gone? Stay with us to uncover a chilling secret that changes everything. The storm outside raged with a merciless fury, howling through the towering pine trees and whipping snow into a blinding frenzy. The wind screamed as it slammed against the small wooden cabin, rattling the windows as if demanding to be let inside. Montana winters were brutal, but tonight felt different, wilder, more relentless. Inside, Jack Turner sat in his worn-out leather chair, staring at the flames crackling in the fireplace. The dim glow flickered against the log walls, casting restless shadows that danced across the room. He exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his stubbled jaw, the rough texture a reminder of how long it had been since he'd last cared to shave. Jack wasn't a man who sought company. 5 years ago, he had walked away from everything: the police force, the city, the ghosts that followed him wherever he went. He had traded it all for silence, retreating to this secluded cabin where the only sounds were the wind and the occasional coyote's distant howl. But tonight there was another sound, a low, drawn-out howl, barely audible over the storm's wrath. It wasn't the eerie call of a wolf or the yipping of a coyote. No, this was different. Jack's body tensed. He set his whiskey glass down on the wooden table beside him, listening. The howl came again, fainter this time, almost swallowed by the wind, and then scratching, faint but desperate, clawing against the cabin door. Jack narrowed his eyes. No one came out here, not in this weather, not in the dead of night. He reached for the rifle leaning against the wall, his instincts kicking in before he could think twice. The last time he ignored a bad feeling, it had cost him everything. He moved toward the door, each step slow and measured. The scratching grew weaker, almost fading. Whoever or whatever was out there was losing strength. Jack inhaled sharply and unlatched the deadbolt. A rush of freezing air slammed into him as he pulled the door open. For a moment, all he saw was white. The storm swallowed everything in its relentless grip, swirling snow thick enough to erase the world beyond his doorstep. But then, a shape emerged. There, half buried in the snow, was a German shepherd. Jack's pulse quickened. The dog's body trembled violently, its thick, black and tan coat matted with ice and dirt. Snow clung to its fur in thick clumps, its paws raw from the cold. Blood stained the snow beneath it. How much, Jack couldn't tell. The dog let out a weak whimper, barely able to lift its head. It had fought hard to get here. But it was the eyes that made Jack freeze. Amber, haunted, desperate. They weren't just filled with fear. They held something deeper, something raw and broken. A look Jack had seen before. Not on an animal, but on people. People who had survived something they shouldn't have. Jack's grip on the rifle tightened. This wasn't just a lost dog. It had come here for a reason. He just didn't know what that reason was yet. The warmth of the cabin slowly seeped into the frozen body of the German shepherd as Jack knelt beside it, rubbing its fur dry with an old towel. The dog barely reacted, its breath slow and uneven, but at least it was no longer shivering. The firelight flickered across its damp coat, revealing the contours of lean muscles beneath, evidence that this dog had once been strong, powerful even. Now it was reduced to a mere shadow of itself, battered by cold and exhaustion. Jack had seen dogs in rough condition before, strays, abused rescues, even canine units that had been worked to the bone. But something about this one unsettled him. It wasn't just the cold that had weakened it. There was something more. He reached for a metal bowl, filling it with lukewarm water, then set it down near the dog's nose. "Drink," he murmured. The animal's eyes barely flickered open. For a long moment, it didn't move. Then, slowly, its cracked nose twitched, and it dragged itself forward an inch, lapping at the water in small, strained sips. "Good boy," Jack muttered, though he wasn't sure if the dog was even listening. He waited as it drank, observing the way its ribs protruded slightly beneath its thick coat. Malnourished. This dog hadn't had a proper meal in a long time. Jack sighed, pushing himself to his feet. He moved towards the small wooden kitchen, pulling open a cabinet where he kept supplies. He didn't have much. Living alone had made him accustomed to eating simple meals, mostly canned food and dried goods, but he had some leftover venison from a recent hunting trip. He sliced off a portion, warming it slightly over the stove before bringing it back to the dog. It lifted its head weakly, eyes locked onto the meat, but hesitated before eating. Jack frowned. "Go ahead." The dog hesitated a moment longer, then slowly took a bite, chewing with a weary carefulness, as if it had learned that food did not always come without consequence. That struck Jack as odd. A starving dog should devour its first meal without second thoughts, but this one had learned to be cautious. As the dog ate, Jack studied it more closely. The more he looked, the more he noticed scars beneath the fur. Not just one or two, but many, some old, some newer. The ones on its flank looked like deep scratches, perhaps from barbed wire or a struggle with another animal, but there were others too, smaller, deliberate, the kind of wounds made by human hands. Jack's gut twisted. He reached out slowly, running his fingers over the thick fur at the dog's neck. His touch was gentle, but the moment his fingers brushed against a particular spot, the dog flinched. Not just flinched, jerked away. Jack pulled his hand back immediately. "Easy, buddy," he said softly. The dog's breathing quickened for a few seconds, its eyes darting around the room as if looking for a way out. Then, just as quickly, it went still again, lowering its head. Jack exhaled, his mind working through the possibilities. He had seen reactions like that before, from people. This wasn't just a lost dog, this was a dog that had been hurt, and not just by the elements. Jack's gaze drifted toward the thick leather collar still fastened around the dog's neck. It was sturdy, well-made, but oddly clean compared to the rest of the animal's filthy fur. That, in itself, was strange. If this dog had been wandering for weeks or even months, the collar should have been just as dirty and worn as the rest of it. His instincts buzzed. Something wasn't right. Jack carefully reached for his knife, flipping it open and cutting through the leather strap. The dog didn't resist. As the collar fell away, Jack turned it over in his hands, inspecting it closely. His eyes locked onto a metal tag attached to the underside, hidden beneath layers of fur. It was smooth, cold, and engraved with a sequence of numbers and letters. Jack's pulse slowed. He rubbed his thumb over the engraving, clearing away the dirt. The markings were clean, precise, not the kind of sloppy stamping you'd find on a pet store tag. A sequence of letters and numbers, military-style engraving. Jack's chest tightened. This wasn't a dog tag. This was an identification code. He sat back on his heels, staring at the numbers. Something about the format was familiar. Too familiar. Jack stood abruptly, moving toward his desk in the corner of the cabin. He pulled open a drawer, rummaging through old notebooks and files, things he had promised himself he wouldn't look at again. His hands found an old leather-bound notebook, the one he had used for years as a detective before he walked away. He flipped through the pages quickly, skimming old case notes, missing persons reports, crime scene observations, until his gaze landed on something that made his breath catch. A case number, 3A4756, the exact same number engraved on the dog's collar. Jack's body went rigid. For a long moment he just stared at the numbers, willing himself to believe he was mistaken. But he wasn't. He knew this number. He knew this case. His fingers gripped the edge of the desk, his mind racing. 3A4756 was from a case that had never been solved, one that had haunted him for years. A missing girl, a trail that had gone cold, a case that had been his last before he left the force. Jack swallowed hard, his heart thudding against his ribs. How the hell did this dog end up here, 5 years after that case had been closed? And more importantly, who had sent it? A chill crawled up his spine, and for the first time in years he felt something stir deep in his gut, an unease that had nothing to do with the storm outside. He turned back toward the fireplace. The dog lay there still and quiet, watching him like it knew something. Jack's grip on the metal tag tightened. This dog wasn't here by accident, and if this case number was what he thought it was, if this animal was truly connected to that night, then someone, somewhere, didn't want it found. His eyes flicked to the snow-covered windows. The wind howled outside, drowning out the silence inside the cabin. But Jack had been a cop long enough to know when he wasn't alone. For the first time in years, he felt that old instinct creeping back in. He wasn't just dealing with a stray dog. He was dealing with something much, much bigger. And the more he thought about it, the more one question burned in his mind. Who let this dog go? And who was going to come looking for it? Jack sat at his desk, the small cabin swallowed in an eerie silence, except for the occasional crackling of the fire. The German Shepherd lay curled up on the old rug by the hearth, its chest rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm. The storm had lessened outside, but the night remained dark, the wind whispering against the cabin walls. He ran a hand over his face, his fingers brushing against the stubble that had become rougher over the past few days. He hadn't thought about the Carter case in years, didn't want to. But now, the past had come knocking, in the form of a half-frozen dog carrying the mark of a case he had tried to bury. Jack reached into his drawer and pulled out a worn manila folder. The edges were curled, the pages inside yellowed with time. He flipped it open, revealing a photo clipped to the top. A young girl with bright blue eyes and dark brown curls, grinning in a school portrait. Emily Carter. She had only been 10 years old when she vanished. No forced entry, no ransom demand, no trace of a struggle. She had been playing in her backyard one evening while her parents were inside. When her mother checked on her minutes later, she was gone, and the only thing missing along with her was the family's German Shepherd. Jack rubbed his temples. He could still remember the desperation in Linda Carter's eyes when she had begged him to find her daughter. She wouldn't run away, Detective Turner. She wouldn't. Someone took her. Please, you have to bring her back. He had promised he would, but he never did. Jack exhaled, flipping through the notes he had taken back then. The dog, then named Max, had been a constant in the investigation. Several neighbors had seen it in the backyard with Emily that evening, and one witness claimed they had heard a strange barking, almost panicked, not long before the girl went missing. Max had been missing ever since, until now. Jack's fingers hovered over the next page, but before he could turn it, a low growl rumbled from the other side of the cabin. His head snapped up. The German Shepherd was awake now, standing near the door, its ears erect, tail stiff. Its amber eyes were locked onto the wooden frame, as if something were on the other side. Jack frowned. He grabbed his revolver from the table and rose to his feet, moving toward the door cautiously. Pressing his ear against the wood, he listened. Silence. No wind, no footsteps, just the faint whistle of the night air sneaking through the cracks in the logs. He slowly unlatched the door and opened it an inch. The cold hit him immediately. The snow outside had settled, leaving the ground untouched. No tracks, no sign of anything or anyone. The dog's growl faded, but it didn't relax. Instead, it turned its gaze to Jack, then toward the darkness beyond the cabin's porch, and then, without warning, it bolted. Jack cursed under his breath. "Hey, wait!" But the dog was already outside, launching itself into the snow, its body moving despite its previous exhaustion. It didn't hesitate. It didn't sniff around like a lost animal. It had a destination. Jack grabbed his coat and boots, stuffing the revolver into his waistband before stepping out into the night. The cold was immediate, biting against his skin. The dog's tracks were sharp in the untouched snow, leading toward the tree line. Jack followed. the trail through the trees. His boots crunched against the ice as he moved deeper into the woods. The forest was quiet, unnaturally so. The occasional rustling of wind through the branches did little to mask the unsettling stillness. Ahead, the German shepherd trotted purposefully, its nose low to the ground, its body tense. It wasn't just wandering, it was tracking something. Jack kept a hand near his gun. He didn't like this. Finally, after about half a mile, the dog came to an abrupt stop. It stood at the base of a massive pine tree, its tail stiff, its body unmoving. Jack approached cautiously. That was when he saw it. Scratches, deep claw marks carved into the bark, some old, some fresh. Jack ran his fingers over them. They weren't made by an animal. They were too deliberate. Something or someone had been here. Jack scanned the area. Snow covered the ground, but beneath the tree's lower branches there was disturbed earth, a patch where the snow hadn't settled evenly. He crouched down, brushing away the frost. His fingers hit something solid. A small plastic object. Jack lifted it slowly. His stomach twisted the moment he recognized what it was. A toy soldier. It was faded, partially broken, but he knew exactly what it meant. He had seen dozens of these in Emily Carter's bedroom. Jack's pulse pounded in his ears. This toy had been here for years, hidden, forgotten, buried under seasons of snow. Had Emily been here? Jack turned to the dog, who was staring at him now, its breath visible in the cold air. "You brought me here," Jack murmured. "Why?" The dog didn't move. It only held his gaze unblinking. Jack felt a chill crawl up his spine, and this time it had nothing to do with the cold. The questions that wouldn't let go. Jack stood, scanning the dark forest. Why would the dog lead him here? Why now, after 5 years? And if Emily had been here once, where was she now? The night was still, the sky a deep expanse of ink, void of stars. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind an eerie silence, the kind that made the world feel frozen in time. Jack stood by the window, watching the snow-covered landscape outside his cabin. The trees stood tall and motionless, their branches heavy with ice, casting long, dark shadows against the moonlit ground. Behind him, the German shepherd lay on the rug near the fire. Its body finally rested, but its ears still twitching, always alert. The dog wasn't just recovering, it was waiting. Jack could feel it. He took a deep breath and turned away from the window. The toy soldier he had found earlier sat on his desk, its plastic frame worn and brittle from years exposed to the elements. It had been buried beneath the snow, beneath time itself, but why? He glanced at the dog. It stared back at him, its amber eyes reflecting the fire's glow. "You're not done, are you?" Jack muttered. The dog rose to its feet, stretched, then walked to the door. It looked up at him expectantly. Jack exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. "You're really trying to tell me something, aren't you?" The dog didn't bark, didn't move, just waited. Jack sighed, grabbed his coat, and slung his rifle over his shoulder. "All right," he muttered, pulling his boots on. "Let's go." A trail in the snow. The night air was sharp, biting against Jack's skin as he stepped outside. The crunch of snow beneath his boots was the only sound, besides the faint rustling of tree branches. The dog trotted ahead, moving with purpose, leaving a clear path of prints behind it. Jack followed. They moved through the trees, past the clearing near his cabin, deeper into the forest. The farther they went, the more Jack realized this wasn't random. The dog wasn't just wandering. It knew exactly where it was going. Mile after mile they moved through the frozen wilderness. The cold settled into Jack's bones, but he didn't stop. The dog pressed on, leading him through a narrow, winding trail, the snow growing deeper with each step. Then, after nearly 5 miles, the dog suddenly stopped. Jack slowed, his hand instinctively reaching for his gun. His breath came out in visible puffs as he scanned the area. They had arrived at a small clearing surrounded by towering pine trees. The snow here was untouched, pristine, as if no living thing had set foot here in years. Jack turned to the dog. It was staring up at something. Jack followed its gaze. A small red scarf fluttered in the wind, tangled in the lowest branch of a tree. Jack's stomach twisted. The scarf that shouldn't be here. He stepped forward carefully, the snow crunching beneath his weight. The scarf was faded, stiff from the cold but still intact. Jack reached up and pulled it free, brushing the ice away. It was small, meant for a child. He turned it over in his hands. A stitched name was sewn into the fabric. Emily. Jack felt his heartbeat hammer against his ribs. This was her scarf. The same one Emily Carter had been wearing the day she disappeared. But how the hell was it still here? Jack turned slowly, his breath coming faster now. The dog was watching him carefully, its tail still, waiting for his reaction. His fingers curled around the fabric. This wasn't just a clue. This was evidence. Emily had been here. Unfinished business. Jack took a shaky breath, trying to keep his mind from spiraling. This was no accident. The dog hadn't just stumbled upon this place. It had led him here. But if Emily had been here once, where was she now? Jack's grip on the scarf tightened. His instincts screamed at him. This case, his last case before he left the force, wasn't over. He needed backup. Someone he could trust. Someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. It had been years since he had last spoken to her, but she was the only person who made sense. He tapped the name, Sarah Bennett. A call for help. Sarah had been his partner back in Billings, a damn good detective, smart, relentless, and one of the few people who had never doubted Emily Carter had been taken. She answered after 2 rings. "Turner?" Her voice was sharp, alert, like she had never stopped being a cop. "Sarah," Jack exhaled, steadying himself. "I need you to listen. I don't have time to explain everything, but I think I just found Emily Carter's scarf." Silence. Then, "You're not messing with me, are you?" Jack looked down at the faded red fabric in his hand. "I wish I was." A sharp inhale from the other end. Then her tone turned professional, focused. "Where are you?" 5 miles from my cabin in the woods." "I'm on my way." Jack nodded, slipping the scarf into his coat pocket. "I'll send you my location," he said. "Jack," she added before he could hang up. "Yeah? If that's really Emily's scarf, someone put it there for a reason." Jack's jaw tightened. "I know." He ended the call and turned back toward the trail. He had just pocketed his phone when a flash of light hit the side of his cabin in the distance. Jack froze, a pair of headlights. They weren't moving, just idling. Then, suddenly, the beams tilted upward, directly toward his window. Someone was watching his cabin. Jack's breath came slow and steady as he pulled his revolver from its holster. His instincts had been right. The past wasn't just coming back. It had already arrived. Jack stood motionless, his fingers tightening around the grip of his revolver as the headlights bore into his cabin like a pair of watchful eyes. The truck remained still, its engine humming faintly beneath the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. It didn't move forward, didn't back away. It just sat there, waiting. His pulse slowed as his training kicked in. Whoever was in that vehicle wasn't lost. They weren't a curious traveler or some stranded motorist. They were here for a reason. Jack exhaled, steadying his breath. He had dealt with men like this before. Shadows in the night who watched from a distance, waiting to see what their target would do. The dog, still standing by his side, let out a low growl, its body tense. Jack moved carefully, stepping towards the tree line, trying to get a better angle without revealing himself completely. If this was a warning, he needed to know from whom. Before he could take another step, the truck's headlights flicked off. For a moment, everything was pitch black. Then, the roar of an engine. Jack barely had time to react before the truck peeled away, tires spinning against the ice-packed road. The taillights vanished into the swirling snow, swallowed by the darkness. Jack remained where he was, listening, no other movement, no sound besides the wind. He cursed under his breath, too fast, too practiced. Whoever they were, they didn't want him following. The dog whined beside him, its ears twitching. Jack reached down, resting a hand on its back, his mind already sorting through the pieces. Someone didn't want this case reopened. And if they had gone to the trouble of driving all the way out here, sitting outside his cabin in the middle of the night, watching him, they knew he was looking. A visitor from the past. The next morning, a knock at the door jolted Jack awake. He had barely slept, his mind still replaying the events of the night before. He grabbed his revolver from the nightstand before moving toward the door. When he pulled it open, Sarah Bennett stood there, bundled in a thick black coat, her breath visible in the cold morning air. "Still paranoid, I see," she remarked, glancing at the gun in his hand. Jack grunted, tucking it back into his waistband. "Old habits." Sarah stepped inside, shaking off the snow from her boots. "Good. You're going to need them." Jack closed the door behind her, eyeing the leather briefcase she carried. The look on her face told him everything he needed to know. Sarah had always been sharp, tenacious, the kind of detective who didn't let go of a case until she had every last answer. She had been the only one who still believed Emily Carter had been taken, even when everyone else wrote it off as a lost cause. She set the briefcase down on his kitchen table, flipping open the latches with a practiced motion. "I went back through the missing persons reports," she said, pulling out a stack of files. "Not just Emily's case, all of them." Jack frowned. "All of them?" Sarah nodded, spreading the papers out across the table. "Over the last 15 years, there have been at least 7 disappearances in this area, all under similar circumstances. No forced entry, no struggle, just gone." Jack scanned the documents, his jaw tightening. "None of these were ever connected," Sarah continued. "The cases were spread out just enough that no one thought to link them. Different towns, different years, different jurisdictions." Jack ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. Damn it, it made sense. If someone was taking people, they wouldn't do it all in one place. They'd move, space it out, make sure no one saw a pattern. Until now. His eyes flicked to the dates. Each case had happened within a 5-year gap, and the last disappearance had been Emily. Jack's grip on the table tightened. 5 years ago, and now, after all this time, the dog had reappeared. The implications churned in his gut. Had the person responsible stopped, or had something or someone forced them to? Before he could voice the thought, a sudden scratching at the door made them both turn. The dog. Jack had left it inside all morning, but now it was at the door, pawing at the wood, whining softly. Jack and Sarah exchanged a look. "Something's out there," she said. Jack moved toward the door and pulled it open. The German Shepherd bolted. "Shit!" Jack grabbed his coat and followed, Sarah close behind. The house in the woods. The dog led them deep into the forest, farther than where Jack had gone the night before. The air was colder, the silence more oppressive. The sun had barely risen, and the sky remained a dull grey, casting an eerie glow over the snow-covered ground. They followed the dog for nearly 2 miles before they saw it. A small, abandoned cabin, almost identical to Jack's but far older. It was hidden behind a cluster of pine trees, the kind of place you wouldn't find unless you were looking for it. Jack slowed his pace, scanning the area. There were footprints leading up to the door, partially covered by the night's snowfall. "Someone's been here recently," Sarah murmured. Jack nodded. "Let's find out who." He stepped onto the porch, the wood creaking beneath his weight. The door was slightly ajar. Jack pushed it open, revealing a dark, dust-coated interior. Inside, the air was stale, tinged with something he couldn't quite place. Sarah took a cautious step forward, her flashlight cutting through the dimness. "This place hasn't been abandoned for long." Jack's eyes flicked over the room, an old table, a broken chair, empty shelves. But the floor, the dust had been disturbed. Someone had been moving around in here, and then he saw it. A trapdoor in the corner of the room. Jack's pulse quickened. He exchanged a glance with Sarah. "This is it," she said. Jack crouched, gripping the metal handle. The wood was old, but the latch had been used recently. He pulled it open, revealing a dark opening beneath the floor. The moment the trapdoor swung fully open, a sound echoed from below. A whimper, Jack's body went rigid. It was faint, muffled, but unmistakable. Sarah's face paled. "Someone's down there." Jack reached for his gun. Then the whimper turned into a scream. Jack didn't hesitate. He descended into the dark. The air inside the basement was thick, damp, and suffocating, laced with the scent of mildew and something far worse, fear. Jack's boots hit the cold, hard floor as he descended the wooden steps, his revolver drawn, his pulse steady, but his instincts screaming. Sarah followed right behind him, flashlight cutting through the darkness. Somewhere in the shadows, a child was breathing. Jack's grip on the gun tightened as his eyes adjusted to the dim light. The basement was crude, walls of exposed concrete, wooden beams running across the ceiling, and in the farthest corner, a rusted metal cage. Jack's stomach turned. Inside the cage, curled up against the wall, was a girl. She was small, frail, no older than 12. Her hair was tangled, dirty, falling over her hollow face. Her arms wrapped around her knees, as if she were trying to make herself as small as possible. The moment she saw them, she flinched. Sarah sucked in a breath beside him. "Jesus Christ!" Jack holstered his gun and took a careful step forward. "Hey, kid," he said, voice low, steady. "We're here to help." The girl shrank back. "Don't come closer," she rasped, her voice hoarse, weak. Jack stopped. He had seen this before, the look in her eyes, the way she held herself like a wounded animal backed into a corner. She had been here too long. Sarah knelt beside him, lowering her flashlight so it wouldn't shine directly into the girl's face. "Sweetheart, we're cops. We're going to get you out of here, okay?" The girl didn't respond. Her eyes darted past them, to the German shepherd standing behind Jack. Something changed in her face. Recognition. "Max?" The dog perked up. Its ears shot forward. Then, before Jack could react, the girl threw herself forward, pressing against the bars of the cage. "Max!" she sobbed, her fingers reaching through the gaps, grabbing fistfuls of fur. "You came back! You found me!" Jack and Sarah exchanged stunned looks. Jack's chest tightened. The dog knew her. This wasn't just any girl. Jack's mind raced as he took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm. "Kid, what's your name?" The girl pulled back slightly, eyes wary again, but she answered. Madeline James." Sarah inhaled sharply. "Jack, that's—" Jack already knew. Madeline James had been missing for 3 months. She had vanished without a trace. And now here she was, locked in a basement in a cabin that shouldn't exist, with a dog that had disappeared 5 years ago. Nothing about this made sense. Jack forced his focus back to Madeline. "Madeline, listen to me. Who did this to you?" The girl's lip trembled. She shook her head violently. "He's still out there." Jack's blood ran cold. Sarah stiffened beside him. "What do you mean, still out there?" The girl swallowed hard, her entire body trembling. "He never leaves for long," she whispered. "He always comes back." Jack turned to Sarah, his voice low and urgent. "We need to move, now." Sarah didn't argue. She pulled a lock-picking set from her pocket, already working on the rusted padlock. Jack turned toward the stairs, scanning the darkness, listening. The cabin had been silent when they entered, but that meant nothing. Whoever had taken this girl had been careful, had been doing this for years. Jack's instincts screamed at him. They weren't alone. Then, before he could reach the top of the stairs, a gunshot rang out. The bullet shattered the wooden doorframe, inches from Jack's head. Sarah yanked Madeline out of the cage, shielding her. "Get down!" Jack barked, shoving them both behind an overturned table. Heavy footsteps pounded above them. A second gunshot tore through the floor, splinters flying. Madeline let out a terrified sob, pressing herself against Sarah. Jack cursed. They were pinned. Whoever was up there wasn't just trying to scare them. They were trying to kill them. Jack locked eyes with Sarah. They needed a way out. The German shepherd stood between them and the staircase, its body low, ears flattened, a deep growl rumbling from its chest. And then, before Jack could stop it, the dog lunged up the stairs, straight toward the shooter. "Max, no!" Madeline screamed. Jack didn't hesitate. He followed. The gunshot rang out like a crack of thunder in the frozen wilderness. The splintered wood from the doorframe rained down around them as Jack shoved Sarah and Madeline down, shielding them from the line of fire. The smell of gunpowder mixed with the cold, damp air of the basement, heightening his senses, sharpening his instincts. Above them, heavy boots stomped across the wooden floorboards, pacing, searching. The bastard knew they were trapped. Jack glanced at Sarah. She was crouched low, her arm protectively wrapped around Madeline, whose terrified sobs were muffled against Sarah's coat. The girl clung to her like she was the only solid thing in a collapsing world. "Stay down," Jack ordered, voice barely above a whisper. "Don't move until I say—" Sarah nodded. She was smart. She wouldn't do anything reckless. Jack turned his attention to the stairs. The dog was gone. Max had launched itself at the gunman the moment the attack started. Jack had seen the raw determination in its body, the unwavering focus in its amber eyes. It had waited for this moment. Then from above, a snarl, a curse, and the sound of a struggle. Jack didn't hesitate. He bolted up the stairs, gripping his revolver tight, his mind already calculating the angles, the possibilities. As he reached the top, he saw them, a man and a beast, locked in a vicious fight. The attacker, clad in a thick black hunting jacket, struggled against the weight of the dog. Max had latched onto his forearm, teeth sinking deep into flesh, refusing to let go. Blood soaked the sleeve of the jacket as the man cursed and slammed Max against the wooden wall, trying to dislodge him. Jack's eyes locked onto the man's face. For the first time, he saw him clearly. Roy Henderson. The name hit him like a punch to the gut. Jack had heard that name years ago, a skilled hunter, a survivalist, someone who knew the wilderness like the back of his hand. He had been questioned once in connection to a different missing persons case, but there had never been any proof, until now. Henderson's face was twisted in rage and pain, his bloodshot eyes darting toward Jack. The moment their eyes met, Jack saw it, the unmistakable recognition. Henderson knew who he was, and more importantly, he knew why Jack was here. With one last desperate motion, Henderson finally tore Max off his arm, throwing the dog hard against the wooden floor. Max let out a pained yelp, sliding across the ground. Jack didn't wait. He fired. The bullet whizzed past Henderson's head, missing by a fraction of an inch as the bastard dodged and dove out the back door. Jack cursed and bolted after him. He could hear Sarah behind him calling his name, but he couldn't let Henderson escape. Not now, not after everything. The chase into the wild. Jack sprinted into the forest, his breath coming in fast clouds of white against the night air. The snow was deep, but Henderson was fast, too fast for an injured man. Ahead of him, Jack could barely make out his dark figure weaving between trees, his movements precise, calculated. He wasn't running blindly. He was heading somewhere. Jack pushed harder, boots pounding against the frozen ground. His muscles burned, but he didn't let up. Then, movement from the side. Jack ducked just in time as another gunshot rang out, the bullet slicing through the air where his head had been a second before. Henderson had turned, taking a shot while running. Jack dived behind a fallen log, pressing his back against the icy bark. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. The bastard was trying to lure him deeper, trying to set him up for the perfect kill shot. Jack wasn't about to let that happen. Carefully, he peeked over the log. Henderson was standing near the edge of a frozen creek, reloading his weapon. He was breathing hard now, favoring his injured arm. Jack seized the opportunity. With a burst of speed, he surged forward, closing the distance between them before Henderson could react. He tackled him hard, both of them crashing onto the ice. The cold shock of the frozen surface jolted through Jack's body, but he didn't let go. He wrestled for control of the gun, slamming Henderson's wrist against the ice once, twice, until the gun clattered away. Henderson was strong, but Jack was stronger. Years of police work, training, and pure stubbornness drove him forward. He landed a solid punch to Henderson's jaw, the crack of impact sharp in the night air. But Henderson wasn't done. The hunter roared in defiance, twisting his body, throwing Jack off balance. Jack hit the ice hard, the breath knocked from his lungs. For a second, everything spun. Then Henderson was on him, hands reaching for his throat. Jack struggled, his fingers searching, grasping. And then a blur of black and tan. Max. The dog lunged out of nowhere, sinking its teeth into Henderson's leg. The scream that tore from Henderson's throat was guttural, raw, filled with the kind of agony Jack knew would haunt a man for years. Jack didn't waste another second. He grabbed the gun Henderson had dropped, rolled onto his knees, and aimed. Bang! The bullet hit Henderson's leg right above the knee. The hunter collapsed onto the ice, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Blood seeped through his pants, staining the frozen ground beneath him. Jack stood slowly, gun still aimed. Henderson wasn't dead, but he wasn't going anywhere. Not this time. Max limped to Jack's side, panting, blood staining his fur. Jack exhaled and reached for his radio. "Sarah," he said, voice steady. "We got him." The case isn't over. By the time Sarah arrived with backup, Henderson was still lying in the snow, his breath shallow, his body weak. The bastard was finished. Sarah approached cautiously, gun still drawn, scanning the scene. "Son of a bitch," she muttered, shaking her head. Jack barely heard her. His mind was still racing, trying to process everything, trying to fit the last piece of the puzzle together. They had Henderson, they had Madeline. But Emily Carter, she was still missing. Jack turned to Henderson, kneeling down beside him. "Where is she?" His voice was low, deadly. "Where's Emily?" Henderson's lips curled into a bloody smile. "You're too late," he rasped. Jack felt the air leave his lungs. Sarah stepped forward. "What the hell does that mean?" Henderson just laughed, a hoarse, broken sound. 5 years, Turner." He coughed, spitting blood onto the snow. "You think you're the first one to look?" Jack grabbed his collar, shaking him. "Tell me where she is." But Henderson's gaze had already begun to blur, the blood loss dragging him toward unconsciousness. Jack's grip tightened. He needed answers. Because if Henderson wasn't the only one involved in this, then Emily Carter was still out there. And someone didn't want her to be found. Some mysteries remain unanswered. Some wounds never fully heal. But in the face of loss, in the depths of the unknown, hope remains. Jack Turner didn't find Emily Carter. But because of one faithful German shepherd, because of Max, another little girl was saved. A life was spared. A story was given another chance to be written. And isn't that what faith is all about? Even in the darkest moments, even when the road ahead seems uncertain, we are never truly alone. Sometimes God sends us a sign in unexpected ways, a stranger's kindness, a sudden revelation, or even a loyal dog refusing to give up. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that love, faith, and determination can still change lives, we invite you to share it. Someone out there might need to hear this message today. Have you ever witnessed a moment of divine intervention? Have you ever felt the presence of something greater guiding your path? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. And if you believe in the power of second chances, in the hope that the lost can still be found, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow for more stories of faith, love, and resilience. May God bless you and keep you safe, and may we never stop searching for the ones who need us most. A new beginning. But wait, was this truly the end? 5 years missing. No trace, no body, only a child's music box buried in the cold. Emily Carter was still out there. Somewhere. And now that Jack had reopened the past, someone else was watching. Stay tuned for the next story. Some doors should remain closed, but what happens when one is forced open? A storm rages through the small town, snow piling high, the wind howling like a ghost in the night. A lonely golden retriever, shivering and starving, limps through the streets. She stops at a door, scratching desperately, her paws raw from the cold. But the door stays shut. She moves to the next house, and the next. Every time, rejection, until one tiny hand reaches for the door and changes everything. What happens next will restore your faith in kindness. Stay with us for this heartwarming story. The wind howled through the empty streets, carrying with it a relentless curtain of snow that blurred the edges of the small Canadian town. The world had turned white. Rooftops, sidewalks, even the narrow streets were buried beneath thick layers of ice and frost. It was a night when no one should have been outside, when even the warmest homes struggled to keep the cold from seeping through the walls. And yet Bailey was out there, a golden retriever, once strong and well-fed, now gaunt and shivering, trudged through the frozen wasteland that had once been familiar streets. Snow clung to her thick golden fur, turning it into a heavy, ice-laden coat that only made each step harder. Her breath came in short, desperate puffs, visible in the freezing night air. She had once known warmth, a fireplace crackling in the corner of a cozy home, hands that stroked her fur, a voice that called her name with affection. But now she was alone, abandoned in a world that had no place for strays. Her paws burned from the cold, the icy ground biting into the soft pads that had once only known the comfort of indoor floors. Each step was agony, but stopping was not an option. The storm was unrelenting, the snow swallowing up any remnants of her past. If she stopped, she wouldn't wake up again. Bailey's ears twitched as a gust of wind carried the distant sound of a house creaking, the weight of snow pressing on its roof. Somewhere nearby, the faint glow of a porch light flickered behind a wall of swirling white. A house, a chance. Summoning the last reserves of her strength, she forced her legs to move. Her tail, once a happy golden plume, now hung low, dragging through the snow. Hunger clawed at her stomach, but it was the cold that terrified her most. She had never known such bone-deep, inescapable cold before. It stole the warmth from her body, numbed her limbs, made her thoughts sluggish. She needed shelter, now. As she neared the house, Bailey lifted a trembling paw and placed it against the wooden door, scratching softly. Her breath hitched as she waited. Would someone answer? Inside, the house was a haven of warmth, its walls holding back the merciless winter. But outside, Bailey remained in the storm, her body slowly succumbing to exhaustion. She scratched again, weaker this time. Still the door stayed shut. A whimper escaped her throat, barely audible over the wind's howling. Bailey stepped back, looking up at the dark windows. No shadow moved behind the glass. No voice called out to her. Her last sliver of hope crumbled. She had to keep moving. With her body barely responding, she turned back toward the endless white abyss, forcing one paw in front of the other. Somewhere, there had to be another door, another house. Somewhere, someone would let her in, wouldn't they? Bailey wasn't sure how much farther she could go. The wind screamed through the narrow streets, whipping snow into a blinding fury. Every breath burned in Bailey's lungs, her once thick golden fur now a frozen matted mess, clinging to her trembling body. Her paws, cracked and raw from the relentless ice, barely lifted off the ground. Each step was agony. Each gust of wind stole more of her remaining warmth, but she had to keep going. A house stood ahead, its windows glowing with the promise of heat and safety. Bailey forced her aching limbs up the porch steps, her nails scraping against the wood. She lifted one trembling paw and scratched at the door, her touch barely audible over the howling wind. She waited, heart pounding in the fragile hope that someone would hear. For a moment there was nothing. Then, a shuffle from within, a shadow moved behind the frosted window. The door creaked open just a crack, and a man's face emerged from the dim light inside. Bailey's tail twitched weakly, her golden eyes pleading, but the man's face hardened. "Damn mutt," he muttered under his breath before slamming the door shut. The cold rushed back like a wave, pressing into Bailey's body, suffocating her. She stood there for a moment, stunned. The warmth had been so close, so painfully close, but it wasn't hers. With a slow, shivering breath, she turned away, stepping off the porch and back into the storm. Another house, another door. She dragged herself forward, past snowdrifts that reached her chest, past houses where laughter and the flicker of firelight shone behind tightly drawn curtains. She stopped at another porch, raised her paw, and scratched again, her touch weaker than before. Footsteps, a voice. "Who's there?" Bailey let out a small whimper, her voice barely more than a whisper against the wind. The door opened slightly, revealing a woman in a thick sweater. Her eyes widened at the sight of the soaked, shivering dog on her porch. "Oh, poor thing," she murmured, her voice laced with hesitation. Bailey felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this time. But before the woman could move, another voice came from inside. A man. "Helen, shut the door. We're not running a damn shelter." The woman hesitated. Bailey met her eyes, silently begging. I'm sorry," the woman whispered, and then the door closed. Bailey flinched at the sound. She stepped back, the rejection sinking deeper into her bones than the cold ever could. She moved again. Another house, another door. Nothing. Again and again. Some houses never answered. Some doors cracked open just enough for someone to wave her away before shutting her out. And some people weren't even kind enough to do that. At one house, she barely had time to reach the porch before the door burst open. A man stood there, scowling. "Get out of here," he snapped, shoving a boot toward her. Bailey stumbled back, heart pounding, her frozen limbs barely responding in time to move out of his reach. "Stupid mutt," he grumbled before slamming the door. She stayed there for a moment, staring at the spot where he had stood. What had she done wrong? Why wouldn't anyone help? The snow continued to fall, heavier now, the wind pressing against her like a living thing, like hands shoving her down, forcing her to surrender. Bailey swallowed hard and moved forward. She had to keep moving. She had to find somewhere safe, but she was slowing down. Her steps, once desperate and determined, now wavered. Her body sagged with exhaustion. Her pups. A sharp pain struck her chest at the thought. Where were they now? Had they survived? Were they safe? Or were they just as lost as she was, just as cold, just as desperate for shelter that no one would give? She should have been with them. She should have protected them. Bailey stumbled, her legs finally buckling under her. The snow caught her, swallowing her whole, cold, seeping into every inch of her body. She gasped, but there was no warmth, no comfort, only ice, only wind. She lay there, shivering violently, staring at the row of houses ahead. They were so warm inside, so safe, and yet every single one had turned her away. A shadow passed by a window. Someone had seen her, someone was watching. Bailey held their gaze, pleading one last time. But the curtain twitched, and then they disappeared. The window darkened. The house, like all the others, remained closed. The cold pressed in harder. Bailey's eyelids drooped, heavy, so heavy. The storm raged on. The blizzard howled, relentless and unforgiving. Snow piled higher, swallowing the streets in an endless white abyss. Bailey's body had long since gone numb, her senses dulled by exhaustion and cold. Every step was slower than the last, her paws barely lifting off the ground before sinking into the deep snow again. She had lost track of how many doors she had scratched, how many hopeful glances she had cast at warm, glowing windows, only to be met with indifference. She had no more strength to beg, no more hope to hold on to, but then a light. At the end of the street, through the swirling snow, a small house stood with its windows glowing gold. Unlike the other houses, it seemed quieter, almost separate from the rest of the town. The warmth spilling from it looked like a beacon in the frozen night. Bailey hesitated. Was it worth it? Would this door be like all the others, shut in her face, sending her back into the storm, back into the endless, merciless cold? But what choice did she have? With whatever strength she had left, Bailey forced her aching limbs forward. The snow dragged against her, each step heavier than the last, but she kept moving. She climbed the short set of porch steps, her paws slipping against the icy wood. Reaching the door, she lifted one trembling paw and scratched, so softly she wasn't sure if it even made a sound. She waited. No answer. She tried again, her paw weaker this time, barely able to lift off the ground. Still nothing. Her heart sank. But then movement. Inside the house, Lily sat curled up by the fireplace, holding a warm cup of hot chocolate between her small hands. The heat of the fire made the entire room glow, the orange flames flickering against the walls. The storm outside was a distant roar, muffled by thick walls and closed curtains. Lily loved nights like this. The way the cold outside made the warmth inside feel even cozier. She pulled the fuzzy blanket tighter around herself and sipped her drink, savoring the sweetness. But then something caught her eye. A shadow. She turned towards the window, pressing her hand against the frosted glass. Outside, barely visible through the snow, was a dog. Lily's breath caught. She sat up straighter, squinting to see through the storm. The dog was big, its golden fur damp and heavy with ice. It stood on the porch, its body swaying as if it could barely stay on its feet. Even from inside, Lily could see it shivering. Her heart clenched. She jumped up. "Mum!" she called, her voice urgent. "There's something outside!" In the kitchen, Evelyn stood at the sink, washing dishes. The day had been long, her body tired from work and errands. She barely registered Lily's voice at first, dismissing it as just another one of her daughter's endless observations about the world. "Lily, it's late," she said without turning around. "But there's a dog," Lily insisted, already rushing toward the front door. Evelyn sighed, drying her hands on a dish towel. A dog? Strays weren't common around here, especially in the middle of a storm like this. She had a sinking feeling about what was coming next. She followed Lily to the hallway, catching up just as her daughter was reaching for the lock. "Lily, no," Evelyn said firmly. "We can't take in a stray." "But it's freezing!" Lily turned to her, her brown eyes wide and pleading. "It's going to die out there." Evelyn frowned, finally stepping closer to the window. She pulled the curtain aside and saw it. A golden retriever, barely standing, its fur heavy with ice and snow. The dog looked straight at the door, eyes filled with a quiet, exhausted kind of desperation, the look of something that had already been turned away too many times. Evelyn exhaled slowly. She knew that look. She knew what it meant to be on the outside, begging to be let in. But she also knew what would happen if they let the dog inside. They could barely take care of themselves as it was. They had no room, no money for vet bills, no extra food for a stray. Taking in an animal, especially one that looked as sick and weak as this one, wasn't something she could afford to do. She turned back to Lily. "Sweetheart, we can't. We don't have—" But Lily wasn't listening. Her little hands fumbled with the lock, her fingers cold against the metal, and before Evelyn could stop her, she opened the door. The moment Lily pulled the door open, the storm invaded the house like an uninvited ghost. A powerful gust of wind howled through the doorway, whipping through the warm air inside, making the fire in the hearth flicker wildly. The cold bit at Lily's cheeks, rushing past her like an icy breath of something ancient and relentless. And standing there, caught between the raging storm and the golden glow of the house, was Bailey. The golden retriever barely moved. Snow clung to her fur in thick frozen patches, her legs trembling violently beneath her. Her head was low, ears pinned back, her entire body radiating exhaustion and cold. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Lily dropped to her knees. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't hesitant. She didn't stop to think about whether the dog was dangerous or sick, or if this was a mistake. All she saw was a soul in need. Without hesitation, she threw her arms around Bailey's neck. The dog stiffened. She wasn't used to this, not anymore. Every interaction she'd had over the last few days had been rejection, cruelty, doors slamming in her face. Warmth had become a distant memory. But Lily was different. The little girl buried her face in Bailey's cold, wet fur, her small hands clutching tightly around the dog's trembling body. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're safe now." Bailey let out a sound, somewhere between a sigh and a whimper. Her body sagged, as if all the strength she had left finally gave out at once. Behind them, Evelyn stood frozen. She had been ready to scold Lily, to tell her that this was reckless, that they couldn't afford to take in a stray, that this wasn't their problem. But then she saw the way the dog melted into Lily's embrace. She had seen a lot of things in her life, struggles, hardship, people fighting just to get by. She had seen hunger, seen desperation, but she had never seen something look so utterly defeated. Bailey was shaking, not just from the cold, but from exhaustion, from something deeper. She had been on the edge of giving up, and she knew it. Evelyn exhaled, closing her eyes briefly. Lily lifted her head, looking up at her mother with wide, pleading eyes. "Please, Mum," she whispered, "just for tonight." Evelyn hesitated. She knew the risks. She knew this wouldn't be just for tonight. But looking at Bailey, at the way she trembled, at the way she had collapsed so fully into Lily's arms, she couldn't say no. Evelyn sighed, rubbing a tired hand over her face. "Just one night, Lily," she said, her voice softer than before. Lily beamed. She turned back to Bailey, pressing her hands against the dog's damp fur. "Come on, let's get you warm." But Bailey didn't move. Lily frowned. She gave a gentle tug, trying to coax the dog inside, but Bailey's legs barely responded. She was too weak. Evelyn swore under her breath. "Move back!" Lily stepped aside, and before Bailey could protest, Evelyn crouched down and scooped the dog into her arms. She wasn't sure what surprised her more, the fact that Bailey barely weighed anything, or the fact that the dog didn't resist. No growling, no flinching. Bailey simply let it happen. Evelyn carried her inside, past the threshold of the house, away from the cold, away from the storm. The moment the door shut, silence fell. The blizzard remained outside, rattling against the walls, but in here, there was warmth. Evelyn gently lowered Bailey onto a thick woolen rug near the fire. The dog let out a weak, shuddering breath as the heat finally began to touch her frozen body. Lily was already moving. She grabbed a towel and dropped to her knees beside Bailey, her small hands working quickly, carefully drying the ice from the retriever's fur. "You're okay now," she murmured, her voice full of quiet reassurance. "We'll take care of you." Bailey barely reacted. Her eyes drooped, her body exhausted beyond measure. Evelyn walked into the kitchen and returned with an old blanket. She draped it over Bailey's back, tucking it around her carefully. Lily glanced up. "She needs food," Evelyn sighed. "I know." They didn't have much. Money was tight, and Evelyn had carefully budgeted their groceries for the week. But she turned, walking toward the fridge. A few minutes later, she set down a small bowl of chicken and rice, the best they could spare. Lily gently nudged Bailey. "Here, girl." Bailey barely lifted her head, but then the smell hit her, and something deep inside her, a survival instinct, stronger than exhaustion, forced her to move. With slow, stiff movements, she lifted herself enough to reach the bowl. She took a hesitant sniff, then weakly she ate. Lily and Evelyn exchanged a glance. Bailey wasn't gone yet. She still had fight left in her, and for the first time in days, she wasn't alone anymore. The storm had passed. Morning sunlight seeped through the frost-covered windows, casting a soft golden glow inside the small house. The warmth of the fireplace still lingered in the air, though the embers had died down during the night. The wind had finally quieted, and outside the town lay buried under thick layers of fresh snow, untouched and glistening beneath the pale blue sky. Inside, curled up on the thick woolen rug near the hearth, Bailey stirred. For the first time in days, she woke to warmth. It took a moment for her senses to adjust. The sharp sting of ice was gone from her paws, the relentless wind no longer howled in her ears. Instead, she felt the soft press of a blanket still draped over her, the lingering scent of food in the air, and the steady sound of breathing. Lily's. The little girl was curled up just a few feet away, still wrapped in her blanket, fast asleep. Bailey blinked slowly, her body still aching but lighter somehow. She lifted her head, ears twitching slightly as she took in her surroundings. This wasn't the street. This wasn't the snow. She had made it. A low creak sounded, and Bailey turned her head just as Evelyn stepped into the room. The woman paused, surprised to see Bailey awake and alert. "Well, look at you," she murmured, kneeling beside her. She reached out, hesitating for a fraction of a second before running her fingers gently over the retriever's head. Bailey didn't flinch. That alone was a sign of progress. Evelyn sighed, sitting back on her heels. You're lucky, you know. If Lily hadn't seen you—" She didn't finish the thought. She didn't need to. Instead, she reached for the empty food bowl beside Bailey, picking it up as she stood. "I'll get you something to eat." As she walked toward the kitchen, Lily stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a second she looked around in confusion until her gaze landed on Bailey. The little girl sat up so fast that her blanket slipped from her shoulders. "She's awake." Evelyn glanced over her shoulder. "I know." Lily scrambled onto her knees, crawling toward Bailey with an excited but careful energy. She reached out hesitantly, waiting for some sign of acceptance. Bailey's ears twitched, and then, slowly, her tail gave the smallest of wags. Lily let out a delighted gasp. "You're feeling better, aren't you, girl?" She ran a gentle hand over Bailey's head, fingers brushing through her now dry fur. It was still a little rough from the cold, but no longer frozen solid with ice. That was when Lily noticed something around Bailey's neck, a thin strip of leather half buried under her thick fur. Lily frowned, carefully parting the strands to get a better look. It was a collar, and attached to it, barely visible beneath the dirt and frost, was a small, weathered tag. Lily's heart skipped a beat. "Mom!" she called, twisting around. "She has a tag!" Evelyn turned sharply, setting the food bowl down before crossing the room in quick strides. She crouched beside her daughter, gently tilting Bailey's head to the side to get a better look. The tag was old, scratched and worn from exposure, but after rubbing off some of the frost, letters began to emerge. There, engraved into the metal, was a name: Bailey. And below it, faint, almost unreadable, was an address. Lily stared. "She had a home?" Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line. "Looks like it." A strange silence settled between them. Bailey had belonged to someone who had once named her, cared for her, someone who had once loved her. So why had she been out there? Had she run away? Had she been lost? Had she been abandoned? Lily swallowed hard. "She wasn't supposed to be out there," she whispered. "She was trying to get home." Evelyn let out a slow breath. She had known, the moment she saw Bailey's eyes last night, that this wasn't just some stray dog wandering the streets. There had been something else in her expression, something that spoke of loss, of searching, of desperation. Now she understood why. This wasn't just a stray. This was a dog trying to get back to something. Lily looked up, determination flashing in her young eyes. "We have to find her family." Evelyn exhaled. "Lily, we don't even know if they're still looking for her." Lily frowned. "Then we find out." Before Evelyn could argue, Lily was already scrambling toward the couch, grabbing for her mother's phone. Evelyn sighed. She could feel the familiar weight of responsibility settling in her chest, the same weight she had felt last night when she carried Bailey inside. She wasn't sure what they were getting themselves into. But there was one thing she knew for sure. Bailey's journey wasn't over yet. That afternoon, Evelyn and Lily took a picture of Bailey and posted it on the local community board online. They listed everything they knew, the name on her tag, the address, a brief description. Then they waited. Would someone recognize her? Would someone come looking? Would the past Bailey had left behind finally catch up with her? They didn't know. But what they did know was this. For the first time in a long time, Bailey wasn't alone anymore. The response came faster than expected. Less than a day after Evelyn and Lily posted Bailey's photo online, a message arrived. A family living on the outskirts of town had seen the picture. They claimed Bailey was theirs, that she had gone missing during the storm. Lily sat cross-legged on the couch, gripping the phone tightly. "It's them," she said, looking up at her mother with wide eyes. "They say Bailey belongs to them." Evelyn sighed, rubbing the bridge of her nose. She had been expecting this. "Did they say anything else?" Lily scanned the message again. Just that they lost her when the storm hit, and that they're coming to get her. She looked down at Bailey, who lay curled up near the fire, her breathing deep and steady. The dog had improved dramatically overnight. Her fur was dry, her body no longer trembling from the cold, and her strength had started to return. She had even eaten a full meal that morning, something she hadn't been able to do before. But there was something else. Even now, even as she rested, Bailey's eyes never stopped searching. She would lift her head, ears twitching, gaze flickering toward the door, as if expecting something, or someone. There was an unease about her, a quiet worry that hadn't faded, even after she had been rescued, and Lily had noticed. "She's not happy," Lily murmured. "Even now she's still looking for something." Evelyn didn't reply. Instead, she walked to the window and looked out. The family had sent another message. They were on their way. Bailey's real owners, so why didn't it feel like good news? The knock came an hour later. Bailey lifted her head immediately, ears perking up. Evelyn opened the door to find a man and woman standing on the porch. They were bundled in thick coats, snow still clinging to their boots, their faces weary but relieved. "Is she here?" the man asked, his voice tight with emotion. Evelyn nodded and stepped aside. The moment Bailey saw them, something inside her changed. She launched forward, not hesitantly, not slowly. She ran. The woman let out a choked gasp as Bailey nearly knocked her over, pressing her body into her legs, tail wagging furiously. The man crouched down, gripping Bailey's face in both hands, his eyes shining. "Bailey, girl," he murmured, running his fingers through her fur. "We thought we lost you." Bailey whimpered, burying her head against his chest, her entire body shaking, not with cold, but with emotion. Lily watched, frozen in place. She had never seen Bailey react like this before. The dog had always seemed quiet, reserved, as if holding back something deep inside her. But now she looked like a dog who had finally found her way home. So why did something still feel off? The man, Mr. Callahan, stood up after a few moments, clearing his throat. He turned to Evelyn, shaking her hand firmly. "Thank you," he said. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found her." The woman, Mrs. Callahan, wiped at her eyes. "She was out there for so long. I don't know how she survived." Lily looked at Bailey, still pressed against them, her body overflowing with relief, and yet her eyes still held that same worry, like she wasn't finished, like something was missing. Lily swallowed. "How did she get lost?" The couple exchanged a glance. "It was the storm," Mr. Callahan said. "We live on a farm about 20 minutes from here. The wind knocked down part of the fence and Bailey ran off. We searched everywhere, but the snow made it impossible to track her. We thought—" He exhaled shakily. "We thought she was gone." Bailey whined softly, pressing against him. Lily frowned. Something wasn't right. Bailey had been trying to get somewhere. She hadn't been wandering aimlessly. She had been searching, desperate, focused, determined. She hadn't been lost. She had been running towards something. Lily stepped forward, her heart pounding. "She wasn't lost," she said softly. Mr. and Mrs. Callahan turned toward her, confused. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Mrs. Callahan asked gently. Lily took a breath. "She wasn't trying to find her way home," she whispered. "She was trying to go back." A silence settled over the room. Bailey lifted her head, her golden eyes flickering toward Lily, and in them, Lily saw the answer. She wasn't wrong. Bailey hadn't been running away. She had been running back, towards something she had left behind. The realization hit Lily like a bolt of lightning. Bailey hadn't just been fighting to survive. She hadn't just been searching for warmth or food or shelter. She had been trying to get back to her puppies. Mrs. Callahan gasped, covering her mouth. "Oh my God!" Mr. Callahan turned pale. "Bailey, the litter." Evelyn frowned. "What litter?" Mrs. Callahan looked stricken. "Bailey gave birth just before the storm hit. We thought—" Her voice cracked. "We thought they didn't make it." Mr. Callahan ran a hand through his hair, his expression dark with guilt. "We assumed she ran because she was scared of the storm. But if she was actually trying to get back to them—" Bailey whined, louder this time. She looked between them, ears low, her entire body tense. She was telling them they were wrong. They weren't gone. Not yet. And she had been trying to save them. Lily took a shaky breath, looking up at the adults around her. "We have to find them," she said. Bailey's tail flicked, just once, For the first time, she looked hopeful. The moment the realization hit, everything changed. Bailey hadn't been lost. She hadn't been running in fear. She had been trying to save her puppies, and now everyone in the room knew it. Bailey stood in the middle of the living room, her body tense, her golden eyes darting between them, filled with urgency. She whined, pacing in small circles, her tail flicking anxiously. She had spent so long trying to get back, fighting against the storm, against the cold, against every door that had slammed in her face. Now, finally, someone was listening. "We have to go," Lily said, already grabbing her coat. "We have to find them." Evelyn hesitated only for a second before nodding. She didn't waste time arguing. There was no room for doubt anymore. Mr. Callahan ran a hand through his hair, looking shaken. "She must have hidden them somewhere when the storm hit," he murmured. "But where?" Bailey whined again, turning toward the door, scratching at it frantically. "She knows," Lily said. "She can lead us." That was all it took. Within minutes, everyone was bundled up, pulling on boots and thick coats, gathering blankets in case they needed them. Mr. Callahan grabbed a flashlight, his jaw tight with worry, while Mrs. Callahan's hands shook as she buttoned her coat. Then, with one last deep breath, they opened the door and let Bailey take the lead. The storm had settled, but the world outside was still buried in ice. Snowdrifts covered the sidewalks, and the cold stung their faces the moment they stepped outside. The sun was setting, casting long blue shadows over the frozen town. Bailey didn't hesitate. She leapt into the snow, moving with new energy, her exhaustion forgotten. She followed a path only she could see, her nose low, her body tense with determination. They followed her through the empty streets, past houses still glowing warmly in the night, past the doors that had once closed in her face. And then she veered sharply toward the outskirts of town. Lily's heart pounded. She gripped Evelyn's hand as they trudged through the deep snow, following Bailey as fast as they could. The dog never wavered. She knew exactly where she was going. And then, suddenly, a shape appeared in the distance. A building, dark and silent against the snow. "A barn," Mr. Callahan murmured. "Old and abandoned. No one's used it in years." Bailey whimpered. Then she ran. By the time they reached the door, Bailey was already scratching at it furiously. Lily's breath came in short gasps as she struggled to keep up. The barn loomed over them, its old wooden beams groaning under the weight of the snow on its roof. The door was stuck, half buried in ice, but Mr. Callahan wasted no time. He planted both hands against the frozen wood and shoved. It took 3 hard pushes, but finally the door gave way. And inside, a weak, trembling sound filled the air. Lily sucked in a sharp breath, a whimper. Bailey lunged forward, scrambling into the barn, pushing past the others. And there, in the farthest corner, curled up in a shaking, huddled mass, were 5 tiny puppies. No one spoke, no one could. For a long moment they all just stood there staring at the scene in front of them. The puppies were so small. Their fur, once soft and fluffy, was now damp and matted with ice. Their tiny bodies pressed against one another for warmth, their breaths weak, their little chests rising and falling with desperate effort. They had been waiting for her, for their mother, for Bailey and Bailey. Bailey let out a sharp, broken whine and rushed forward, licking each of their tiny faces, pressing her body around them in a desperate attempt to give them warmth. They responded instantly, nuzzling into her, whimpering softly, weak but alive. "They're alive," Mrs. Callahan whispered. She pressed a hand over her mouth, eyes glistening with tears. "Oh my God, they're alive." Lily dropped to her knees, reaching out gently, her small hands brushing over the tiny bodies. They were cold, too cold. "We need to get them out of here," Evelyn said quickly, snapping into action. She shrugged off her coat, spreading it open. "Wrap them up." Mr. Callahan and Mrs. Callahan moved without hesitation. They lifted each fragile pup with the gentlest hands, carefully wrapping them in the warmth of their jackets and blankets. Bailey never left their sides. She kept sniffing them, licking them, counting them, making sure they were all there. She had fought so hard to reach them. And now, finally, they were safe. They made their way back through the snow, the little bundles tucked securely in their arms. The walk home was quiet, except for the sound of the wind and the faint, sleepy whimpers of the puppies buried under layers of warmth. Bailey stayed right next to Lily the whole way, brushing against her leg, her golden eyes finally peaceful. And for the first time since the storm had begun, Bailey wasn't searching anymore. She had found them. She had brought them home. And because of one little girl who had refused to turn her away, her story, their story, didn't end in the snow. The puppies had survived. For the first time in what felt like forever, the weight of fear had lifted from Bailey's golden eyes. She lay curled around her 5 tiny pups, her body still thin and weak, but her tail wagging ever so slightly. She had done it. She had saved them. And she hadn't done it alone. Lily sat beside her, carefully running her small fingers through Bailey's fur, watching as the puppies wriggled closer to their mother. She could still feel the warmth of the little bodies in her arms from the night before when they had carried them home, wrapped in coats and blankets, shielding them from the cold. They were safe, and it was all because of one simple choice, because one little girl had opened her door. Mr. and Mrs. Callahan were overwhelmed with gratitude. "I don't know how we can ever thank you," Mrs. Callahan whispered, kneeling beside Bailey, stroking her fur with gentle hands. "She never gave up. She was trying to tell us, and we didn't listen." "She never would have made it without you," Mr. Callahan added, looking at Evelyn and Lily. His voice was thick with emotion. "If you hadn't taken her in that night, she wouldn't have survived." Bailey lifted her head slightly, pressing her nose into Lily's palm. Lily giggled, gently scratching behind the dog's ears. "Maybe there is something we can do to say thank you," Mrs. Callahan said suddenly, exchanging a look with her husband. He nodded. Mr. Callahan turned to Lily with a warm smile. "Would you like to keep one of the puppies?" Lily's eyes went wide. "Really?" she gasped. Mrs. Callahan laughed softly. "We know you love Bailey, and after everything you've done for her, we'd be honored if you kept one of her babies." Lily's heart soared. She glanced down at the small bundles of fur, eyes scanning them, until one tiny pup caught her attention. A little white one, the only one in the litter with pale, almost snowy fur. Lily carefully scooped him up. The tiny pup nuzzled into her hands, letting out a small, contented sigh. A smile stretched across Lily's face. "His name is Snowy." Bailey let out a soft huff, licking the puppy's tiny head. It was almost as if she approved. Lily beamed, and just like that, her life changed forever. The story spreads. The town was small. Word traveled fast. Within days, everyone had heard about what had happened. The storm, the rejection, the last door that finally opened. And soon someone else took notice. Mr. Howard, the local newspaper columnist, lived just a few houses down from Evelyn and Lily. A retired journalist, he still contributed to the town's weekly newspaper. When he heard about Bailey's story, he knew it was something the town needed to read. A few days later, the front page carried a new headline: "The Girl Who Opened Her Heart and Saved a Life in the Storm." The article recounted everything: Bailey's desperate journey, the many doors that had shut in her face, and the one that didn't. It told of how a little girl's kindness had not only saved one life, but 6. It didn't name the houses that had turned Bailey away. It didn't have to. Those who had done so already knew who they were, and when they read the story, they felt it. The guilt, the shame, the uncomfortable weight of realizing they had turned their backs when they could have helped. And for some, it changed them. A town transformed. Evelyn had seen it before. People often looked away from things they didn't want to deal with. But something about Bailey's story was different. The people who had ignored her couldn't ignore what they had done. They had turned away a desperate, starving animal in the cold, and they had almost let her die. So when Evelyn suggested starting a local animal rescue group, she expected a few volunteers. What she didn't expect was for the same people who had once shut their doors to show up asking to help. Neighbors began offering food, blankets, and supplies for any other animals in need. People who had once looked away now stepped forward, eager to do something different. The town that had once been cold and indifferent became a place of warmth and kindness. And it all started because one little girl opened her door. A new beginning. The snow began to melt. The town shed its winter coat, revealing the promise of spring beneath. Bailey had fully recovered. She was healthy, strong, and happy. And more than anything, she was home. Lily and Snowy became inseparable. The little pup followed her everywhere, his tiny paws padding across the wooden floors, his fluffy tail wagging at everything she did. And at night, when Lily curled up in bed, Snowy curled up beside her, small and warm, right where he belonged. Bailey often joined them, watching over her pup the same way she always had, with love, with patience, with quiet strength. Lily had saved her. Now it was Bailey's turn to watch over Lily. A town changed forever. The people of the town never forgot the storm, and they never forgot Bailey. She became a quiet symbol of change, of what it meant to care, to help, to choose kindness when it mattered most. No one looked away anymore. No one turned their backs, because now, whenever someone saw an animal in need, they thought of Bailey, and they remembered the little girl who had saved her, because sometimes all it takes to change the world is one open door. The lesson of the story. Kindness has the power to transform an entire community. One small act, a door opened, a heart willing to care, was enough to spark a chain reaction, turning a town of indifference into a town of compassion. Lily's decision to help a shivering dog in the snow didn't just save Bailey. It inspired others, showing them that kindness is a choice, and that choice can change lives. God always guides those with compassionate hearts. Even in the coldest storms, even when all hope seems lost, He places miracles in the hands of those willing to act. Bailey's journey was not just about survival. It was about faith. Faith that someone would open their door. And when one door opened, it changed everything. Let this be a reminder. Never turn away from a soul in need. You may be the only hope they have. So keep your heart open, keep your hands willing, because you might be the difference someone is desperately waiting for. If this story touched you, share it. Let kindness spread, one open door at a time.